Good afternoon, everyone. I will be waiting just a few seconds so that everybody can connect, and then we'll get started. Right, I think that's, we can start. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, dear participants. I am pleased to welcome you today to the SDM session on social inclusion. My name is Sabrina Kajoli, and I'm the Senior Gender Specialist at the OECS Commission, and I will have the honor to be your moderator for the next 60 minutes today. This session will have two parts. During the first part, I will ask a few targeted questions on social inclusion to our panelists, whom I will introduce shortly. And during the second part of the panel discussion, the floor will be open to all participants for possible questions and comments and exchange with the panelists. So first, allow me to introduce our most distinguished panelists. Here with us today are Ambassador Elizabeth Thompson, Ambassador of Barbados, with the responsibility for climate change, small island developing states, and law of the sea. We have also with us Mrs. Toni Brodber, representative of UN Women Multi-Country Office for the Caribbean. Mr. Stephen Lean, SDM Ambassador and founder of the organization Dare to Dream. Let me tell you a little bit more about them. Ambassador Thompson has worked in development policy for nearly 25 years. She is Barbados' former ambassador to the United Nations. Her professional experience includes serving as Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, with specific responsibility as one of two executive coordinators of the Rio +20 Conference on Sustainable Development. She has also worked with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's Sustainable Energy for All initiative, and in a number of advisory roles within the UN system, including on the transition from the MDGs to the SDGs. She's a former Minister of Energy and Environment of Barbados and has led development of Barbados' first national green economy policy, national energy policy, and sustainable development policy. She has also served as an elected member of parliament and minister from 1994 to 2008. And her work in environment, climate change, and sustainable development earned her the prestigious Champion of the Earth Award. She has authored several papers on the themes and is the co-author of 2 books on sustainable development. She holds an LLM from the Robert Gordon University, an MBM with distinction from the University of Liverpool, an LEC from the Hugh Wooding Law School, and an LLB from the University of the West Indies. Welcome, Ambassador Thompson.
So much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
We also have with us Toni Brodber, who is the representative of UN Multi-Country Office Caribbean. She was, prior to her appointment in August 2020, the deputy representative with the MCO Caribbean from 2019 to 2020. And before this, Mrs. Brodber was the team leader for the Advancing Gender Justice in the Pacific program with the UN Women Fiji Multi-Country Office. She served as gender specialist for the UN Development Program in South Africa, as well as briefly with the UN Women South Africa Multi-Country Office, and established what is now known as the UN Women Country Office in Haiti. Mrs. Brodber's work experience also includes lecturing in international relations and development studies at Yanshan University in China, and directing and co-producing a film on Haiti. Mrs. Brodber received her first degree from the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, and has postgraduate degrees in development studies and business administration from the London School of Economics and ESAD Business School in Barcelona. She's raising 2 sons with her husband. Welcome. Representative Robert.
Thank you very much.
Here with us also, Stephen Lean, Mr. Stephen Lean, also known as Coach Lean. He's a dedicated father of 3 amazing children, proud grandfather, international motivational speaker, award-winning television producer, and global responsible fatherhood advocate. He started as a community organizer in the Green Housing Projects of Chicago, and Coach Lean has spent over 27 years encouraging fathers to embrace the challenges of responsible fatherhood. He has led multiple innovative trainings, such as the award-winning television program Dare to Dream, A Father's Guide to Success, the Fatherhood Training Center located in New York City, the Fatherhood Emergency Response Series, I Will Be Successful Job Readiness Training, Future Fathers Club, and Caribbean Fatherhood Coalition. Coach Lean has successfully changed the priorities, focus, and practices of countless fathers and father figures around the world with the team motto rooted in the fact that fatherhood is deeds, not words. Welcome, Ambassador Lean.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good to be here.
So many thanks to the 3 of you for accepting to join us today and discuss the topic of social inclusion with a special focus on gender and persons with disabilities. First, allow me to share just a few definitions for our audience to clarify the scope of the addressed topic. Some of us may actually wonder what is meant by social inclusion and gender, and what is the actual or overarching objective of this discussion. So let me quickly specify the following. Social inclusion is usually defined as the process of improving the terms of participation in society, particularly for people who are disadvantaged, through enhancing opportunities, access to resources, voice and respect for rights. It is, as you know, a core aspiration of the 2030 Agenda. Gender equality means that women and men should enjoy the same rights, responsibilities, and opportunities, irrespective of whether they were born male or female. And as such, gender equality and women's empowerment is also a core aspiration of the SDGs, in particular under SDG number 5. Hence, this panel aims at discussing and understanding the inequalities affecting men and women and persons with disabilities in the OECS region. So after this brief introduction and this being said, I suggest that we just jump in now and allow me to start by asking to our 3 knowledgeable experts here a very topical question, which I believe is on everybody's minds and lips. Distinguished speakers, in your view, what effect has the COVID pandemic had on social inclusion? May I turn first to Ambassador Thompson for sharing her views? Just in 2 minutes, just to set a little bit the setting of the context of our discussion today. Over to you.
Well, good afternoon, listeners. I'm delighted to be sharing this panel with such experts and people who are working hard to contribute and to make a transformational difference in the region. To get to your question, I think there is both anecdotal and documentary evidence that COVID-19 has exacerbated the challenges of social inclusion. In particular, I think they're making us step back and look at how we consider social inclusion. We could start with the traditionally vulnerable groups, women, the physically and mentally challenged, persons who are unemployed in some instances, and in some countries, young people, persons who are not included and who are disadvantaged for one reason or another. But we are seeing now that persons who are not vaccinated, for instance, are having challenges of a particular type, vulnerability to disease, marginalization in some societies where they've gone for mandatory vaccines. Persons who are not vaccinated are excluded. They're on the outside of perhaps employment opportunities. I think that there is a lot of information that COVID-19 has exacerbated the challenges that women face in societies. The incidence of domestic violence has increased, for instance. Women being thrown on the unemployment market, into unemployment from the job market, that is on the increase, because many women who, whether they were teaching, particularly women who were employed in the hotel sector, are all now, a lot of these women are unemployed. In addition to that, women who work in traditional sectors like teaching, like nursing and home care are under even more pressure because COVID has heightened the need for care and caregiving in the society. And a lot of that is falling to women. So there are many ways in which COVID-19 has exacerbated the challenges of access, of inclusion, of opportunity, and certainly of optimism, because a lot of people feel depressed by what is happening in relation to COVID. And as the pandemic goes on and deepens, at a time when people thought this would have been behind us or beginning to be behind us, it really is causing a high level of depression, of social alienation, of fear, of loss of hope. And there is now emerging in the region from professionals the clear information that the incidence of suicide and suicidal ideation, the idea of suicide, people feeling so hopeless that they want to end it all, that is very much on the increase. So this has been a problem for us, COVID-19, for social inclusion.
Thank you, Ambassador Thompson. So thank you for this first feedback. Representative Broadbent, what is your perspective? Do you concur to this statement of Ambassador Thompson that the situation has been actually exacerbated due to the COVID pandemic?
Absolutely. And I think first I want to acknowledge how honored I am to be on a panel with Ambassador Thompson, who is a woman whose career I have been watching for a very long time. And I do want to highlight some of the women in the audience who I know quite well, Tamira Brown and Letitia Nicholas. It's always good to see OECS women participating as much as they can in OECS Summit events. I think when we look at the definition of social inclusion that you shared with us, this notion of what makes a person disadvantaged is what we really need to start unpacking. And the fact that there are a lot of beliefs that we have about how women should be and behave and what women should do, and how men should be and behave and what they should do, that are leading to a lot of what Ambassador Thompson described. Now, if we look at the economic aspect of things, you're looking at some of what anecdotally is showing up in the evidence. 81% of the women who work in the care economy in our homes, domestic workers, have lost income. Because of course, with COVID-19, a lot of people are not now thinking, well, do we need someone additional in our home, especially someone who may not be vaccinated? Mm-hmm. When you look at where women are in the economy, the jobs that have been lost by sex, by the countries that have been, that have the data available that we've looked at, a lot of women are in the tourism industry. A lot of women are in the services industry. Those were the first industries that we had to pull back on when COVID-19 hit. So we have to think, yes, from the economic standpoint, how a lot of women have been disadvantaged at that macro level and micro level. But then also what Ambassador was speaking to about the micro level with men. While men may not have lost as many jobs, they're still expected to provide. And if you are unable to provide, what does that mean for your understanding of yourself as a man and your relationship with those people around you? And this goes to some of the social disadvantages that we really need to address as well that have happened as a result of the pandemic. What disadvantages women and men, again, have to do with how we believe they should be behaving. And that's where we get to issues of gender-based violence. And gender-based violence was a problem before the pandemic. If you look at this slide, you can see what the stats were. 1 in 2 women in Guyana indicated that they were a victim of some form of intimate partner violence. And we can go into the life cycle of violence and we can go into how this affects children. But let's look directly at the fact that 1 in 2 women, if we were all Guyanese, at least one of us on this call would have been affected by this. Now you're stuck at home. You don't get to go out to work with COVID pandemic. The invisible work that a lot of women do, taking care of children, now includes teaching them, right? I have a 3-year-old who started school this year, and I'm expected to help him with his online schooling while also participating in seminars like this. How is that going to be possible? So these are some of the ways in which I think you can see how social inclusion has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you so much, Representative Broadberg, for these illustrations. Ambassador Lean, I think that we very much like to hear from also a male perspective on this issue and your thoughts about how the COVID pandemic has impacted social inclusion issues. Over to you.
Well, it's been absolutely devastating on all fronts. I echo my colleagues. All of the statistics and the details that they've mentioned were completely accurate. I'll say this. The first and foremost that it's been so devastating is the life's lost. In fact, we're still losing lives as we speak. COVID is hitting us now as we speak. So we're not through the storm yet. And the misinformation, the confusion, the anger has just made households just out of control in many ways, fearful, stuck, trapped. But I have to say, regarding the young men, it's been devastating on us regarding the educational system. And I want to say that to those listening who are still on the fence, who are still hesitant. Understand this, when our children not going to school, when our children having to adjust on the fly with the online learning, which we did last year, which many of the nations were not prepared for. We've all acknowledged that. We've possibly lost a year of education. How do we get that back? All of us that have been in this field for some time, particularly the educators and the social workers, state that those are the primary years. You know, a child's through secondary, primary, all the way through college. We can't get those years back of learning. They were learning something. It just wasn't what needed to be learned. The educational process was devastating. And now, because of COVID, even now as I speak, we're going to have to come up with some very creative planning, some ideas and some outreach sticks, some strategic planning, if you will, to make sure that we don't lose another year. Because as I said before, it's still here and it's not going anywhere anytime soon until such time as we get fully vaccinated nationwide, region-wide. So COVID is our number one battle right now for social inclusion. And of course, as I said before, all of the things that they mentioned, particularly the violence, the home violence, the anger. And we see that when the children come out, when the quarantine is lifted, it's just a gang warfare. Deaths go up, shootings go up because they've been arguing online. They've been arguing on Twitter. They've been arguing on Facebook. We understand what's been going on. And now it's before us. So we're just praying that it passes us by fairly quickly.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Lean, for your comments on this that concur actually also with the comments shared by Ambassador Thompson and Representative Broadberg. I think that we're all very much conscious of the fact that unfortunately in the current crisis and recent context prompted by the COVID-19 crisis, the question of social inclusion is actually a burning issue, is a topical issue. And so I think that it would be very interesting to hear now a little bit more about what we can do about it. As you said that the question is full of challenges, but we should plan now for the future and how we can tackle the challenge. So I would like now to turn back to Representative Broadberg and ask her. We often speak of leaving no one behind in relation to the SDGs. Please enlighten us. What does it mean for gender equality and for persons with disabilities?
Well, I think, again, what we have to start talking about is why people are left behind. And sometimes we don't like to accept what the data is telling us because it doesn't necessarily align with our beliefs of what things are. For example, we see a lot of ambassadors being women. We see in the case of Barbados, we have a woman prime minister. So we say women have a right, not acknowledging that when we look at young people who are not in employment, who are not in education, who are not in training, the majority are still women. And why? So when we're thinking about leaving no one behind, we have to think about the structural issues as to why people are left behind, why some of those structural issues look at women being left behind in terms of education, in terms of employment, and of course, in terms of being able to create a livelihood for themselves and their families. And the other ways, socially, we are seeing a lot of men and women being left behind because of the ways in which we believe men and women should behave. Ambassador Lynn spoke about the fact that we're seeing crime go up. I'm actually in Jamaica right now, and I was speaking to the taxi driver, asking him, how's the crime situation? And he was saying a lot of what Ambassador Lynn said. And the issue is, if we teach men that there are only certain ways in which you can resolve conflict in a masculine way, if we teach people that you can be loving and part of that loving is to hit and to beat, when we have children who are scarred and traumatized, women who are scarred and traumatized, and men who are scarred and traumatized being left behind, then we understand that this is a situation that needs to get to the core issue of what we believe men and women should be able to do. It is the same with people with disabilities. We have certain assumptions about people living with disabilities, that we need to make decisions for them, that they may not be able to be as empowered as many of them are. But the main issue is that when we are making policies across our countries to cover the 17 SDGs, whether we're looking at no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, or sustainable cities, life above water and life below water, where have you planned for women? Where have you planned for men? Where have you planned for people with disabilities? Where have you planned for the people whose work is invisible? And unfortunately, when we do the gender analyses of the planning documents, and you can see UN Women has completed a summary report, COVID-19, looking at what some of the COVID response strategies were, that unpaid care sector was not really given as much attention as it should be. There were some leaders that acknowledged, look, we know it's going to be hard for parents, but some had to, regardless, shut down school without shutting down work. What does that mean? When a lot of the information went out with regards to the COVID response strategies, sometimes, and in many of our countries, we have a sign language person who's translating what is happening in front of the entire audience. But often, a lot of the information doesn't go out as well in all of the different ways that it needs to for people who are living with disabilities to understand how this affects them as well. So really what it means leaving no one behind is making sure that we are thinking of those who are invisible, those who do the work around us that we don't often value because it just happens, and making sure that when we are planning to build back from COVID, we are keeping them at the forefront of our minds. Because like the canary in the coal mine, when you address the issues of those most left behind, you start to address the issues of everyone. Everyone benefits. Something as simple as making a market universally accessible for people in wheelchairs helps pregnant women, older people, male and female. So we need to start thinking more about, this is not an additional thing we do when we have more finances or it makes time. leaving no one behind is good for our businesses and it's good for sustainable development.
Thank you so much, Representative Broadbent. Where have you planned for women? Where have you planned for men? Where have you planned for persons with disabilities? I'm quoting you because I think that it's a good transition to the next question to Ambassador Lean, and I know that this issue is close to his heart as well. Ambassador Lean, in your view, how should policy and development work be positioned to reach the Caribbean make?
Thank you so much. My friends, colleagues, family, it is with great honor and anticipation that we present this day an SOS of epic proportion sent decades ago by our young men crying out to a nation for help. I speak to you on this day on their behalf, for as a result of our actions, our disinvestment, and our acceptance of cultural norms, now deeply rooted in false beliefs, negative attitudes, and ineffective practices, their lives are in danger, leaving only a sliver of hope to be rescued. I speak to you of the alarming escalation of young men lost at sea, so to speak, having no guidance, no support, discipline, or outlets specifically charged with their rescue, leaving these troubled souls to survive on their own, a challenge many, if not most, are unable to overcome. Much like the pandemic we are faced with today, an evil force, more deadly by far, has attacked our young men, masking itself in the cloak of the streets, giving false hope, kinship, security, and unconditional love, feelings our boys desperately need and unfortunately willing to die for in their confusion. To battle this foe, we must develop and implement creative therapeutic and intervention programs specifically designed for young men, addressing key elements of life while building strong character, armored with education, courage, and dreams strong enough to withstand the onslaught of the streets. For those in disbelief that this internal war on our future exists, you need only see the daily numbers of young men exhibiting deviant behavior, manifesting itself in actions that have become all too familiar and even more frightening, culturally accepted. Deviant behaviors such as increased dropout rates, increased acts of violence, increased numbers of drug abuse, gang affiliation, and the list goes on. Couple this with the devastating numbers of fatherless homes, hollowing out our communities and leaving a void of leadership, structure, discipline, and unconditional love. You begin to start to see how the perfect storm was created and now at our shores. So it is in this light that today we come to you with the rescue, if you will, experience and knowledge, looking for a commitment from the nations to say we understand that this problem is before us. No longer can we just put them all in the melting pot. We love our daughters, we love them dearly, but our boys are different. We look different, we talk different, and we no longer can treat them differently with the issues that are before us.
Thank you, Ambassador Lean. Thank you for the powerful statement. Liaising our topic of social inclusion with another topical issue globally, I would like now to turn to Ambassador Thompson. Ambassador Thompson, we have heard an introduction of this session about your impressive achievements at the national, regional, and international levels in relation to the environment, climate change, and sustainable development. Please tell us, how is social inclusion for all tied to the environment, climate change, and sustainable development? Oh, you're muted, Ambassador Thompson.
Oh, sorry about that. I didn't want any noises to interfere when the others were making their excellent presentations. So I muted myself and then forgot to unmute, sorry. Okay, so I was saying that if you accept that sustainable development is exactly that, creating opportunity for everyone, ensuring that people feel that the society has something to offer them, because very often you see people opting out or acting out because they don't believe that the society has something to offer them. They don't feel that the society has invested in them or in their future or the future of their family, or as we would say, people who look like me, people like we, as we would say in Barbados. And you pull yourself, you see yourself as being alienated from the rest of society. So there is a connection between environment and social inclusion. First of all, we've been talking about green recoveries, and we have to ask ourselves, I think, as policymakers, what sort of post-COVID world do we want to have? Do we want to see people still socially excluded? Do we want to have such socially stratified societies? Do we want to have societies where there are deep economic disparities so that at the slightest external shock, there is no resilience to address the degree of the challenge with which we are being presented? So the first thing I think that we have to look at is crafting, deliberately, consciously developing policies and initiatives to build resistance that will have a different kind of post-COVID world. Then you look, we talk about green recoveries. If you consider that a lot of jobs can be found in the green sector, in the greening of the economies, in the blue economy, in the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy technologies, and that this requires new construction, changing the way we build. It requires reinforcing our housing. It requires strengthening our buildings. It requires underground utility services, et cetera, et cetera. Different kinds of fridges, even things like your insecticide and so on. And all of these things have to be made, manufactured, built, products have to be created, et cetera. New technologies have to be utilized, learned, deployed. And if we therefore find opportunities for those who are currently marginalized, the physically and mentally challenged, for women in particular, who are, and this goes to a question of perception. In our region, we think that women do extraordinarily well. Representative Broadbent mentioned it, but the reality is that women still earn 60 to 80 cents of a man's dollar. The reality is that even though you see a lot of women graduating from the University of the West Indies, the women are still the majority of the unemployed and the underemployed. And women, even educated women, are the last ones to get jobs. So you have to look at how climate change, how environmental issues are a cause and consequence of poverty. You address some of the systemic causes of poverty, and you address the challenge overall by attempting to build resilience and ensuring that there's greater social inclusion, greater opportunity, greater jobs for those who are currently marginalized.
Thank you so much for this very enlightening feedback, Ambassador Thompson, which liaises a lot with the concerns expressed also in introduction of this session. The final question I have for you right now, maybe to end this primary part of the session, is what kind of change do you want to see happening in our region specifically, perhaps in the next 5 to 10 years? Ambassador Thompson, you mentioned the post-COVID world, and we have mentioned that there are lots of concerns pertaining to social inclusion that has actually been going a little bit backward due to the COVID pandemic. So what are your thoughts, distinguished speakers? Ambassador Thompson, please go ahead.
And pick up on something that Tony was saying earlier. I think that, and of course, policy is clearly where the bulk of my work has been. I think that there has got to be a different policy approach. Coming out of Beijing, we all established these departments of women's affairs, and then we started calling them gender departments and so on. But the reality is that when we develop new policy initiatives, new programming, very often the Bureau of Gender Affairs is not invited to comment, to analyze, or give input, or to indicate how these new initiatives or policies will impact women. And I strongly believe that the time has come when we have to have gender specialists in all ministries, not just a department of gender affairs, so that they can very early start to influence and structure policy in a way that benefits women and the marginalized, so that women are not an afterthought, but that their benefit. And when you benefit women, you benefit families. You cannot exclude women as part of your national wealth of resources and then think that you can build strong, resilient societies. You have to include them. So that inclusion has to start very early, and it has to start at the policy level. And I really think that we need gender specialists across ministries to consider how all policies impact women and to improve the level of social inclusion for women and by extension for families. So I'm going to pause here and let the other speakers make their particular interventions on this.
Thank you very much for this very concrete proposal, Ambassador Thompson. Representative Barber, would you like to?
I was having a little problem finding my mic as well. Thank you, I was unmuted. I think Ambassador Thompson hit the nail on the head. I think we have to start looking at our sustainable development in a comprehensive way, in a micro way. The policy must impact the lives of those that Ambassador Lin spoke to. And I wrote down the deeply rooted false beliefs that he was speaking to, because that is toxic masculinity. That is telling men that in order to be masculine, you need to be violent. It is telling men that going to school is not masculine, doing well in school is not masculine. Even though we can talk a lot about the kind of education that we really need as a region and all of that, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But I think concretely, absolutely what Ambassador Thompson said, if we have these bureaus of gender affairs, they must be well-resourced, they must be invested in, and there need to be focal points of gender equality across all of the different ministries. They cannot be the ones doing it on their own with the least resources. We also need to be thinking about people with disabilities and how we have created systemic ways to address the barriers that they have faced in the past. Many of our countries have ratified every country in the Caribbean has ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, some on people with the rights of people living with disabilities. We need to not only look at these conventions in the Beijing Platform for Action as an important thing to demonstrate political will, but there's clear guidance in each of these documents as to what we can do and should do to make sure that all of the people in the region have an opportunity to live their best lives. We come from a space where the historical disadvantages that many groups have faced based on race, class, ethnicity, we are living with some of those legacies. And as we've made efforts to push forward, COVID-19 is demonstrating very clearly that if those efforts are not rooted systemically in the way in which we do business, they'll be easily rolled back. We're already seeing them being rolled back. So I think structures such as the one that Ambassador Thompson spoke to must be put in place, and financing. If we don't have the financing, whether it's using gender responsive budgeting opportunities or innovative financing, getting the private sector on board in a way that really builds on their comparative advantages, because government cannot do everything on its own. and empowering communities to do as well for themselves, then we will be able to have a systemic approach to sustainable development that leaves no one behind.
Thank you, Representative Broadberg. Ambassador Lee, a few final words on this about
Well, there's
how
some
you see
things that
the change in the next 5 to 10 years in our region.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to start with change starting in October because we can't wait any longer. These issues that we've been talking about, even today, those of us who have been in this business for quite some time, we've heard them so many times, we can't even tell you. So now it's time for implementation of the planning, the policies. We don't need to draft more policies that we did the policy last year of the policy we did before. So we have some key things that we're going to be promoting to OECS. And once again, we thank them for taking the lead. We know now OECS gets it. First and foremost, we're looking for OECS to continue taking the lead on establishing the region-wide young male mentorship program, including all member states and affiliates in the fall of 2021. We're ready to move forward. We do not have to wait, particularly if COVID hasn't done anything. It's alleviated our fears and got rid of our excuses of accepting technology, us having to do online schooling, us having to do these Zoom meetings on a consistent basis has opened up the region to us now, where we had excuses. Oh, I'm not going to be able to go to Barbados. I'm not going to be able to go to Trinidad, and we couldn't. But now there is no excuses, particularly with the youth. The youth understand how to maneuver it. So we're looking to implement a region-wide young male leadership program ASAP, because if we do not, come next year, our numbers could grow exponentially with all the deviant behaviors we spoke to before. Second, we found that unfortunately, one of the keys to the behaviors and our young men acting out against our women, to our young men putting their hands on females, to our young men disrespecting not only the females, but themselves, is because they don't have a father or a father figure. They have no one to emulate. They're just left to their own to try to figure out how to get through life in this man body with 2 and 1. Those of us on the line who are men, you understand when you're 13 and above, you start having these voices in your head that you don't know where it's coming from, nor do you have anybody to talk to about it. So we're asking that OECS in the region really put together and support the Responsible Fatherhood Initiative. Many of the islands have fatherhood programs that have been keeping their heads above water barely, with a minimal communication amongst themselves and really no conduit. So if we push that forward, that's going to fill a lot of the gap that we need for the young men, which then transcends to us dealing with the women. A lot of the issues that our mothers and our sisters and our aunts, and we love you so much, we don't want you to have to go through what you go through, but we need to talk to the men. And we love that you talk amongst yourselves, the UN and all of the affiliates. We love going to these conferences. It's incredible. All the things they're saying are true. But there's very few men in there, and they're the ones who are the perpetrators. They're the ones who need to listen to the message. They're the ones who have to start believing and understanding that equality is for all. So those are the types of things, as well as some extremely innovative programming, getting the boys back to college, getting them internships, getting them to understand home ownership, all those types of things that young men learned many years ago from their father. But because he is not there, we're going to have to pick up that ball. If we do not, it's at the peril of us all.
Thank you, Ambassador Lin, for this comment. So I hear from all of our speakers, passion for equality for all, really, and for and a recommendation really for effective action in the next few years, so that change can really occur, and so that social inclusion can be more effective and embrace a larger scope. On this few words, I would like now to move to the second part of the session, whereby we will open the floor to the participants. So I engage all participants to put their possible questions in the chats. We already have received some, so without wasting time, because I'm conscious of the time, and so I would like to take the first question immediately. As our boys go through primary and secondary education, they interact on a daily basis with female teachers predominantly. Does this have an effect on our boys to pursue traditional education systems, and why men are turning away from teaching jobs?
I could speak from a boy's point of view. I used to be a boy many moons ago, about 200 years ago. So I could tell you, for the majority of us, it does not really matter. We enjoy a male teacher that gives us somebody to look to that looks like us, sounds like us, dresses like us. But for the most part, we're hungry for the knowledge. We want to know how to be a pilot. We want to know how to be a baker. We want to know how to be an oceanographer, whatever the case may be. That is our focus. It matters not who is before us, what gender, just the fact that they're knowledgeable, they have the discipline, and they are somebody who's giving us what we need. They're feeding us the knowledge, and that's coming from a man's point of view. So, but we encourage more fathers. Once we start the college tours and we start opening the eyes of the young men to what teaching really entails, then it's just fantastic.
I think that
I wanted to add, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I wanted to add to that. Thank you for that, Ambassador Lynn. And I also think one of the things we need to also be aware of history. Many of us will know that there used to be a lot of male teachers. Many of my uncles, great uncles were teachers, and they moved out of teaching. And if we look at why and what has happened as to when women moved in, salaries for teachers have consistently gone down as more women have moved in. And I think that's something we need to start talking about more, about why these salaries go down when women move in, and has the work shifted? It's critical work, and most of us are now learning how difficult the work is. So we need to also look at policies that improve the wages of people who teach, many of whom are women. And as Ambassador Lynn said, I think the role model effect is important. I think women in Afghanistan would tell you more than ever, being able to have a woman teaching men and women is important. That said, we need to look at what traditional education is in the Caribbean right now. I know many governments are looking, and this is something that the head of OECS now, when he was the head of CXC, spoke about. Are we educating our people for the world as it is right now? Just because you have tertiary education, Ambassador Thompson spoke about how much women make to the dollar that men do. Tertiary education and certification is not translating into employment in the same way that you would think it does, unfortunately. And so we need to start thinking about all of the different kinds of education. Why aren't we valuing the plumbers that we need to come in, the electricians, vocational education, as well as education that requires you to have a PhD or a master's level degree, all need to be valued in our society, as well as agriculture. We need to start growing what we eat more and more and more in our region. And so we need to look at why only some jobs are seen as appropriate jobs for boys or appropriate jobs for girls. How do we get more girls and boys into STEAM? At this time, it needs to be more girls, because there are not a lot of girls as many girls in engineering and the technological fields. More and more, we need to start rethinking what education needs to be for the world that we have, and how that education could reach little boys and little girls in the same way. I have 2 little boys. I see there are some differences around energy and how they sit still or do not sit still, that may need to have shifts for little girls who seem to sit still a little bit more differently than little boys do. So how can we have educational spaces that are open to these differences, these nuances? Not every little girl is this way and not every little boy is this way, but that all people who are in the classroom feel valued. There's a space for them to learn and excited to learn.
Thank you very much for these very complimentary answers. I don't know if Ambassador Thompson would like to add something, or whether you'd like us to move to the next question.
No, I thought that my colleagues did really great. I didn't think that I have anything to add.
All right, so let's move maybe to the next question. So I see that the education topic has raised a lot of interest, but here we have also another question in relation to entrepreneurship and business. So the Caribbean has been noted as a region with some of the highest numbers of women in entrepreneurship and business. Also a region where these women are often the primary caretakers within the home. Although men may not be often seen as primary caretakers, their roles have still been expected to be traditional. Has the OECS Commission or region taken strategies to highlight the contributions of role model men who may have transitioned from backgrounds which may have been associated with crime prevalent areas and have been successful in achieving upward mobility in the private sector? Can you give an example as to how this has happened in practice based on the strategies implemented? First, maybe if I may elaborate a little bit on this question is, it starts with a statement that the Caribbean has been noted as a region with some of the highest numbers of women in entrepreneurship and business. Is that a fact? Do we have a few figures or an idea of the trends and patterns there?
Okay, if I may, I'm curious to hear Ms. Broadber on this, Mrs. Broadber, but I think that there are a lot of assumptions that the questioner made. If I start with the core one about female entrepreneurs, traditionally, if you look at female entrepreneurs in the Caribbean and in Barbados and the Caribbean, there are women who have done hair, women who have done nails, women who've been involved in food-related services, etc. There have not been women leading construction companies. There have not been women leading engineering firms. There have not been women leading various types of design firms. Some have now gotten into, if you look at some of the traditional professions, law, medicine, but if you go back to what we think of as entrepreneurship, we have not thought of the woman who is selling food from a van as an entrepreneur. And I can tell you that it is very difficult for women in the Caribbean to access capital. I remember practicing law. I owned a building in my name. I wanted to buy another one. And I went to the bank and said, look, you know, I really want to buy a larger building to practice from, rent out part of the space, etc. And the banker said to me that I would have to bring my husband in. And I said to the banker, who happened to be a woman, but this is a building from my law firm. My husband has never practiced law a day in his life. What has this got to do with him? And I don't know of any man who goes to the bank and the banker tells him, you need to bring in your wife so that we can give you a loan. You know, and I had good credit. I didn't owe the bank any money or anything of the sort. So women have found it very difficult to access capital for entrepreneurship generally across the Caribbean. And a lot of what they have done, they've done doing it against the direction of the wind without a lot of support, just sheer grit hanging in there. So I just want to deal with that first part of the question, and perhaps Tony can speak to the other parts about the male models and so on, that or Stephen about the models and so on that the questioner asked about. But I want to disabuse people with the notion that there's been a lot of support for women entrepreneurs and that we have made broad breakthroughs as female entrepreneurs. In fact, if you look at women sitting on boards of businesses across the region, there are very few. Anyway, I'm going to pause.
Thank you very much. I'll invite Representative Broadber and Ambassador Lin to react as well, but I'll ask you to be very brief because unfortunately I can see that the time is going fast. So over to you, Representative Broadber.
Time is going fast and the questions are coming furiously. I think Ambassador Thompson's personal experience demonstrates that of many women entrepreneurs. Also, the data is showing, and you can find this data not only on UN Women's website and some of the studies we have done on economic empowerment in the Caribbean, but also look at IDB. You can also look at some of what the OECS has done on micro, small, and medium enterprises. Most entrepreneurs who are women are entrepreneurs of one, themselves. And most entrepreneurs who are men are entrepreneurs of a bigger company. And I think Ambassador Thompson well explained this. What we have to really look at is, how do we define entrepreneurship? What drives people to entrepreneurship? There's a series right now happening in Barbados called the Pivot Series that asks a lot of women, what led you to become an entrepreneur? Is this something you were passionate about? Or were you driven to do this because you lost your job? Because maybe your relationship status changed and you needed to take care of your children? That shifts the way in which you do business. Also, a lot of the barriers to entrepreneurship that are difficult for many people who come from different socioeconomic classes, especially lower socioeconomic classes, that additional burden of a woman being asked to bring her husband or her father in, as Ambassador Thompson said, is one that is still happening today, even though that is not policy and it should not be practiced. So yes, there are women entrepreneurs. Why they're there affects how they do. What they are doing entrepreneurship in also affects how they do. But that important role about how are we sharing care? How have we shifted roles? So we're encouraging, and I saw a question about our mothers coddling their boys. I think we absolutely have to love our boys and show boys love. And as Ambassador Lynn has been saying, their fathers need to be comfortable showing them hugs and loves and kisses, because that should not be something that only girls benefit from. Little boys must benefit from knowing that they're loved and how to show it. I think it's critical that men get as engaged as possible, not only in the homework part of parenting, but in the care part, the emotional labor part of parenting. Because it is one thing for a working woman to have her own business, but also be thinking about all of the other parts of the unpaid care economy that needs to be taken care of in her house, and be able to engage fully in her life and the life of her family. Men need to share the care. They need to share that emotional labor, and it is an honor to be able to do so.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Representative Broadbent. As this session is unfortunately coming to an end, I would like to take seize as an opportunity the last question that we have received for concluding remarks. Good afternoon, everyone. Have you seen glimmers of hope with respect to social inclusion coming out of this pandemic? And what are some of the existing projects, programs, or policies that you would consider helpful? And I will challenge you, distinguished speakers, you have 1 minute to respond to this question so that we can keep the time and finish on a positive note. Over to you, Ambassador Lynn.
I'm so sorry. That question had so many parts to it. Give us the breakdown, really. What do you need to know? What do you want to know?
I think is, what's your hope, and do you have examples of good practice that you would like to convey to the audience as a concluding remark?
I got you. The bottom line is, this is not a competition nor a battle between men and women, boys and girls, inequality. There's enough for both. One doesn't have to suffer for the other. So I'd like to one day get rid of that whole concept. Oh, the inequality. We need ours, they need theirs. This is one family, one voice, one team. But I'm calling an action out to all of the nations. It's time now for us to start implementing the work and the policies we've been drafting for so many years. It's time to put them in play. We understand that there's some issues with money. However, the best things in life are free. We all know that by now. So we encourage us, let's put our heads together, let's get ready to sacrifice, and let's move forward. And I mean starting tomorrow.
Thank you for this, Ambassador Lee. Representative Broadbent.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of good practices, but first let's start at the micro level. I think someone like Ambassador Lynn is demonstrative of hope, because we have men who are saying Gender equality is important. You don't need to say it as gender equality is important. You say we don't need to compete. There's enough space for women and men to thrive. And these are the ways in which we do it. Ambassador Thompson, for example, has always been a hope for me. When you see people who look like you doing excellent things across the world, it is an empowering space for women, young girls. I'm no longer that young, but young girls to be able to see people who look like them thriving and what is possible for you. I think at the broader level, we have programs like the Partnership for Peace program or the Man-to-Man program in Grenada, where if you are a first-time batterer and you come before the courts, you go through a 16-week behavioral change rehabilitation program. That's a program that has been going on for over 15 years now. The recidivism rate is very low, but it recognizes accountability for your action as a man, as well as now you becoming a different kind of force within your relationship. If it stays, it may not stay, but at least within your community. The Spotlight Initiative, which is the EU UN funded initiative that has so much to say, look, this is how we must comprehensively address violence against women and girls. I think the efforts the government of Barbados is taking to shift the educational space, moving away from one exam when you're 10 or 11, and that is it for you. If you don't make it to these schools, who are you unless you have money? I think moving away from that and redoing the educational system is a critical part of it. And then also the government of Jamaica, which is not necessarily an OECS country, but we can all learn from one another, looking at innovative financing, looking at gender bonds, looking at green bonds, looking at ways in which we can bring more money to this work to leave no one behind, and actually implementing it is critical.
So my colleagues gave great examples. I'm going to say very briefly, because I know we're scrambling for time, that the one thing COVID has done is made us pause and think. It has made us look at the whole issue of building resilience. And once we pause, think, and start to really engineer resilience building, then there is hope, because we can take the path to a new direction. We can build new things, create new opportunities, and have a better society.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Thompson. I think that it's fantastic to finish this session on such a positive note, also with concrete examples also of programs and activities that we can look forward to seeing being effectively implemented into our region to advance social inclusion in the Caribbean region. I would like, as this session is coming to an end, to thank you all three very warmly for sharing your in-depth expertise and views on social inclusion, gender, and persons with disabilities. I would like also to thank all the participants for their expressed interest and constructive questions to the fruitful debate. Here is an evaluation poll that you are invited to fill, to provide feedback on this session. I would like also to take a moment to acknowledge appreciation for the assistance of our that managed to make this panel inclusive of native French speakers, like myself, by the way. And thank you very much also to our donors, sponsors, and partners, in particular USAID, Thoughtful Digital Agency, GEF, Caribbean Regional Oceanscape Project, REPNIT, Amex CID, and the FAO. Now, this is the end of this session, but this is not the end of the SDM. So I would like to encourage you to join the next session, which is on Youth Innovating to Create Sustainable Future. It is scheduled at 2:45 p.m. in the auditorium. And in the meantime, you can take advantage of the break to visit the booth in the lobby. So I thank you all again very warmly, and enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you. Goodbye and thank you.